Years before the letter, before Clara's sudden return, before the secrets clawed their way out of the shadows, there was a time when my life was defined by silence, struggle, and a desperate search for meaning. I was barely 18, fresh out of high school and full of hope despite the weight pressing down on me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening, the harsh glow of the single overhead bulb casting shadows on my mother's face. She was stern, distant, the woman who had always seemed to favor Clara, her perfect daughter. "Why can't you be more like her?" she said quietly, not looking at me. "You'll never amount to anything if you don't try harder." Her words hit me like a punch. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but instead I swallowed the pain and nodded silently. That moment, so small and yet so heavy, became a defining point in my life. The moment I realized I was on my own. At university, I worked 2 jobs to pay for my tuition. I stayed up late, poring over books, determined to prove to my mother, and to myself, that I was worthy. But no matter how many awards I won, how many scholarships I earned, my mother's cold gaze never warmed. Clara's achievements were always brighter, louder, more celebrated. I felt like a ghost in my own family. Then came Miguel's death. The news came wrapped in whispers, rumors swirling around a tragic accident. I was crushed, not just by grief but by the confusion and silence that followed. Our mother barely spoke of him. Clara left town soon after, and I was left to pick up the pieces alone. In those dark months, I discovered my father's hidden life. Secrets Miguel had kept from us, truths buried beneath layers of lies. I found old letters, photographs, and a diary that hinted at dangers I didn't understand. It was then that I realized Miguel hadn't just died by chance. Something far more sinister had taken him from us. But I was alone, powerless, and afraid. Years passed in a haze of loneliness and quiet desperation. I buried myself in work, avoiding family gatherings and the painful memories they stirred. The resentment towards Clara simmered beneath the surface. She was the daughter chosen, the one who had escaped. Yet a part of me longed to understand her absence, her silence. When the anonymous letter arrived, the key to Miguel's legacy, it reopened wounds I thought had healed. It called me back to the past, to a house filled with dust and secrets, and to a sister I barely knew. Now, as I stand on the edge of uncovering the truth, I carry the weight of those years with me. The years of silence, of fighting to be seen, of wrestling with a family torn apart by love and betrayal. This is why I fight. Because the past refuses to stay buried. And because I refuse to be forgotten. My name is Anna, and for most of my life I felt like I was living in someone else's shadow. My sister's shadow, to be exact. While the world saw Clara as the perfect daughter, the shining star of our family, I was the one left in the dark, the overlooked, the forgotten. My mother chose her, or so it seemed, and that choice carved deep scars into my heart and shaped every moment of my existence. Growing up, it was impossible to ignore the way my mother's eyes would light up when Clara walked into the room. The way she smiled at her achievements, praised her talents, and whispered promises of a bright future. I, on the other hand, was the quiet disappointment. The one who had to work twice as hard for scraps of attention and affection. It was like living under a heavy cloud, one where love was rationed and I was always last in line. I remember sitting on the worn steps outside our old house, clutching a tattered notebook, pouring my thoughts into it because no one else seemed to care. The silence inside was deafening, filled with unspoken words and broken dreams. My sister's laughter would echo through the halls, but it felt miles away from me, like a melody I couldn't reach. School was my refuge, a place where I could build a life separate from the weight of my family's expectations. I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove that I was more than just the forgotten daughter. I worked late into the nights, fueled by frustration and hope, dreaming of a future where I would be seen and valued. But even as I climbed the ladder of success, the ache of being second best never left me. At family dinners, my achievements were downplayed, while Clara's were celebrated with extravagant praise. My mother's favoritism was a constant reminder that no matter what I did, I was never enough. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done wrong. Was it my fault that she chose Clara? Was there something broken inside me that made me unworthy of love? I wrestled with these questions in silence, trying to find strength in the cracks of my broken family. That pain became my fuel, a fierce determination to rise above, to carve my own path, and to prove that life is not about the hand you're dealt but how you play it. Years passed and I built a life defined by independence and resilience. I made a name for myself in the city as a lawyer, fighting for those who had no voice. I surrounded myself with friends who became the family I never fully had. But the ache for acceptance, for my mother's love, remained a quiet, persistent echo. Then out of nowhere Clara returned. She came back like a storm, bringing with her memories I had long buried and secrets that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. The sister who had been chosen, the one I had resented and avoided, suddenly stood before me, no longer the girl I remembered but a woman scarred by her own battles. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would force me to confront the past, to face my mother's betrayal, uncover hidden truths, and fight for the justice that had eluded us all. This is my story. A story of pain and perseverance, of broken families and shattered illusions, of vengeance and ultimately redemption. Because life has a way of showing who truly wins in the end. And I was ready to find out. After Clara left, the silence in our house grew heavier, like a thick fog that swallowed every word, every hope. Those years were a blur of loneliness and unanswered questions, the kind that make you wonder if family is just a word, or something more complicated like a trap. I stayed. I stayed because I was tied to the past, to the memories of a father I barely knew and a mother who never chose me. I watched the house grow colder, the rooms filled with echoes of what could have been. My world shrank to the small routines that kept me sane: work, books, and the occasional call from my sister, distant and brief. It wasn't easy. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake replaying every argument, every silence, every time I felt invisible. I asked myself, was I really the failure my mother painted me to be? Was Clara truly the favored one, or was she just better at hiding her scars? I found solace in the few friendships I had. Friends who didn't judge me for my family's secrets, who offered laughter and support when I felt weak. But even they couldn't fill the void left by a mother's rejection. My career became my refuge and my battlefield. I fought for justice for others, victims of lies, betrayal, and silence, all while my own wounds festered in private. Every case I took was a reminder that truth has power even when the cost is high. Then one day I received a letter. No return address. Just a name, Miguel Herrera. The name of the father I barely remembered, the man whose legacy was tangled in shadows and lies. The letter contained a key to a house I had never visited, to secrets long buried. It was an invitation and a challenge, to uncover the truth behind my family's facade. That moment marked the end of the silent years. It was the beginning of a journey that would bring Clara back into my life, shatter the illusions we had lived under, and force us both to face the consequences of our mother's choices. Because sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. And sometimes the only way forward is through the storm. That letter from Miguel Herrera was more than just paper. It was a door opening to a past I had never dared to explore. The address led me to a house on the outskirts of the city. An old, forgotten place wrapped in ivy and silence, much like my own family history. Standing before the rusted gate, I felt a mix of dread and curiosity. The house was empty except for dust-covered furniture and boxes filled with memories. But what caught my eye was a stack of paintings hidden beneath a tarp in the corner of the attic. Miguel had been an artist, I discovered. His paintings were haunting, raw emotions captured in brushstrokes, each canvas telling a story of love, loss, and betrayal. It was as if his soul was painted on those walls, screaming truths I had never heard. Among the paintings I found a letter addressed to me. It spoke of a life Miguel never got to live, of a daughter he hoped would one day find him and understand the truth. The letter revealed secrets about my mother, about choices that had destroyed families and silenced voices. The discovery was both a gift and a curse. I felt closer to Miguel than ever, yet the weight of his unfinished story crushed me. I knew that to honor him I had to fight, not just for his legacy but for the truth that had been hidden for too long. Clara's name echoed in my mind. Our fractured relationship suddenly felt less important than the battle ahead. I needed her, not as a sister chosen by our mother, but as an ally in the fight against the lies that threatened to consume us all. I reached out to her, unsure if she would respond. The years apart had created a chasm, but the ghosts of our past had a way of drawing us back together. When Clara answered, her voice was guarded but familiar. She too had felt the pull of the past, the need to confront what had been buried. Together we would unravel the secrets of our family. Together we would seek justice, not just for Miguel but for ourselves. Because some truths are too powerful to remain hidden. And some battles must be fought as one. Reconnecting with Clara was like stepping into a storm. The years apart had hardened us both, leaving wounds that weren't easily healed. Our conversations were cautious at first, each word weighed down by memories we hadn't dared to share. Clara wasn't the sister I remembered. She carried the scars of exile and regret, and a fierce determination I hadn't expected. But beneath that I sensed the same loneliness and longing I felt, a desperate need for answers, for closure, for some kind of peace. We met in the very house that had become the symbol of our family's shattered past. Between peeling wallpaper and fading photographs, we began to piece together what had been broken, not just by our mother's choices but by years of silence and betrayal. Our mother loomed like a shadow over every conversation. The woman who had chosen Clara, who had turned her back on me, was now at the center of a storm we were determined to face. Her secrets were the key to understanding everything: Miguel's death, the lies, the pain. As we dug deeper, the fractures between us began to show. Clara's bitterness clashed with my resolve. She blamed me for leaving, for not fighting harder. I resented her for being the favored one, the daughter who walked away. But we shared something undeniable: the desire to uncover the truth. That bond, fragile yet fierce, held us together. One night, as rain poured outside, we found an old diary hidden beneath the floorboards, our mother's diary. The pages were filled with confessions, regrets, and a chilling account of the choices she had made to protect her secrets. Reading her words, the woman we thought we knew dissolved into someone complex and broken. She wasn't just a villain or a victim. She was both, tangled in a web of love, fear, and desperation. It was a turning point. The path ahead was uncertain, but Clara and I knew one thing for sure: we couldn't do this alone. Together we would face the past, fractured but unbroken. The discovery of our mother's diary unleashed a tempest we could no longer ignore. Every page pulled us deeper into the tangled web of her choices: the sacrifices she made, the secrets she buried, and the lies she wove to protect the fragile facade of our family. Clara and I spent countless hours poring over those confessions. We learned of the pressure our mother faced, from powerful men, from her own fears, and from a past she desperately tried to escape. The diary spoke of threats, bribes, and deals struck in shadows, all centered around Miguel and the life he tried to protect. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Miguel's death was no accident. It was a calculated act designed to silence him forever. And our mother, torn between love for her family and fear for her own survival, had played a part. Anger boiled within me, but so did a deep sadness. The woman who had chosen Clara over me was also a prisoner of her circumstances, trapped in a cycle of deceit and pain. We realized that to seek justice we needed more than the diary. We needed proof, documents, witnesses, anything that could expose the truth beyond doubt. The storm gathered around us, fierce and unrelenting. Our investigation attracted attention. Threats came in whispers and shadows. Friends became enemies. But Clara and I held on to each other, our resolve hardening like steel. One evening, as we prepared to confront another lead, the phone rang. A voice, distorted and cold, warned us to stop. The message was clear: we were close to something dangerous. Fear crept in, but it was overshadowed by determination. We were fighting not just for Miguel but for ourselves, for the chance to rewrite the story our mother had tried to hide. The path was dark, filled with peril and uncertainty. But the storm had to break. And when it did, nothing would be the same. The threats we received were more than just warnings. They were echoes of betrayal that reverberated through every part of my life. I started noticing the little things: unfamiliar cars parked near my apartment, phone calls with silence on the other end, emails deleted before I could read them. It was a subtle but constant pressure, a reminder that someone was watching. Claire felt it too. Our late-night conversations often drifted toward fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing the fragile progress we'd made. Yet beneath the fear was a shared stubbornness. We refused to be silenced. We uncovered that Miguel's investigations had touched powerful people, men who had built empires on corruption and deceit. Names began to surface, whispered in back rooms and hinted at in shadowed meetings. These were men who would go to any lengths to protect their interests. I remembered the nights I sat in courtrooms defending the innocent, fighting for justice. Now I was on the other side of the fight, a target instead of an advocate. It was a harsh, painful role reversal. One such ally was Eduardo Vargas, a man from Miguel's past. Meeting him was surreal, a witness to the truth but also a keeper of secrets. Eduardo's insights and the letters Miguel left behind became vital pieces in our puzzle. As we pieced together the web of betrayal, I understood that this wasn't just a family's tragedy. It was a reflection of a society willing to sacrifice truth for power. Each step forward was a battle, but Clara and I had made a promise to each other, to see this through no matter the cost. Because some betrayals cut deeper than blood. The weight of the truth was unbearable. Every new revelation felt like a blow, a fracture in the fragile foundation I had built around myself. Clara and I were no longer just sisters reunited by blood but warriors caught in a battle far bigger than we imagined. Our mother's role in the tragedy became clearer with every passing day. The woman who had once chosen Clara over me was now a figure shrouded in suspicion and regret. The more we learned, the more I realized the lines between victim and perpetrator were blurred. Our relationship with her became strained, conversations laced with accusations and silences that screamed louder than words. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted a mother. Someone to hold me, to tell me the truth without filters or lies. Instead, I faced a woman broken by her own demons, trapped by the decisions she made in a desperate attempt to protect herself and her family. Forgiveness felt impossible, yet the anger threatened to consume me. The investigation accelerated, with Clara and me at its center. We exposed corruption that reached into the highest echelons of power. But with each victory came retaliation. Threats intensified, allies withdrew, and the danger grew. One night, after a close call with a shadowy figure near the gallery, I realized that the fight was no longer just for justice but for survival. Yet in the darkest moments, I found strength in Clara's unwavering presence. Our bond, forged in pain and resilience, became the anchor in a storm of chaos. This was the breaking point, the moment when everything could either shatter or transform. And we chose to fight. I thought I had seen the worst of my family. I thought uncovering the truth about Miguel, reclaiming what was mine, and watching my mother finally shatter in silence would mark the end of it. I was wrong. Claire came back. Not as the girl from magazine covers or charity galas. She was thinner now. Her eyes darker. Like she'd swallowed the shame of her husband's arrest and let it ferment into quiet fury. She walked into my firm unannounced. The receptionist buzzed my office. "There's a Clara Moreno here. Says she's your sister." My stomach dropped. When I opened the door, she stood tall, dressed in black. No makeup. Just war. "Hello, Anna," she said. "Can we talk?" I closed the door behind her. She didn't sit. She stood by the window looking out over the skyline. "I know what you did." I said nothing. She turned. "You think this was justice? Destroying everything I built." "You mean what he built?" I asked. "What you posed in front of while pretending to be a queen?" She crossed her arms. "You always hated me." "No," I said. "I envied you. Because you had her love. Or at least what passed for it." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You think she loved me? That was never love. That was control. I did what she wanted because I didn't know how not to. You were the only one who resisted. And she hated you for it. But you weren't the mistake, Anna. You were the one thing she couldn't mold." For a moment the air thickened. I saw the girl inside her, the one who followed orders, smiled on cue, never questioned. "I lost everything," she whispered. "So did I replied. "But I built something from it. You just inherited illusions." She didn't respond. Just left. But it wouldn't be the last time I saw her. The lawsuit made headlines, but it also unearthed something I hadn't expected. Miguel's old estate. A house in the desert. Abandoned, crumbling, yet untouched. Left in my name. I went there alone. It was quiet. Sun-bleached. The wind carried dust and memory. Inside the house I found canvases. Dozens of them. My father had been painting obsessively before he died. Faces. Eyes. Landscapes soaked in shadow and longing. And in the back room, one unfinished portrait. A girl. A child. Half-formed. My features. On the floor beneath it, a note. "For the child I'll never meet, but already love." I sank to my knees. I hadn't cried in years. But there, in that room, I let it all go. The pain, the hunger, the silence, the years of pretending I didn't want love. I stayed there for a week, sorting through his life, breathing in the world he'd tried to leave for me. Then I packed the canvases. I brought them home. And I opened a gallery. Not in my name but in his. The Miguel Herrera Foundation. His work would be seen. His story told. He would be remembered. Not through her lies, but through my truth. I thought I had unearthed everything. But secrets have roots. The day after the gallery opening, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside a photo. My mother. Pregnant. Younger. Not with Miguel. With a man I didn't recognize. And a date. 2 years before I was born. I hired a private investigator. The truth was grotesque. Miguel wasn't my biological father. He had taken my mother in after she'd been assaulted. The real father was someone else. A politician. Married. Powerful. Miguel knew. But he chose to raise me anyway. To love me despite the horror. He died under suspicious circumstances weeks after confronting the man. It wasn't a car crash. It was murder. And my mother knew. She had protected the man. Taken hush money. Disappeared the evidence. Buried Miguel's name in scandal. She didn't just resent me. She was complicit in my father's death. I took the information to the press. I released documents. Letters. Everything. The story exploded. The politician, now retired, revered, fell in disgrace. Investigations reopened. My mother became a pariah. But I didn't do it for vengeance. I did it for Miguel. The man who chose me. The man who died for protecting me. And in the end I realized something. Winning isn't always about triumph. Sometimes it's about choosing not to be silent anymore. The weeks after the scandal were merciless. Our mother, once a commanding presence who dictated the rhythm of our lives with a steady hand, was reduced to a fragile shadow of herself. Her confidence shattered, her reputation torn to pieces by the revelations we had unleashed. The whispers in the town swelled into a roaring storm. The press circled like vultures eager for every new detail. And Clara? She vanished once again, slipping away from the world she had tried so hard to inhabit, leaving a void filled with unanswered questions and bitter memories. For days I wondered where she had gone, the sister who had been a stranger for so long, yet who had shared my blood, my history, and the same family secrets. Then one biting cold evening, as the city lights flickered and the wind whispered of winter's approach, I found her standing outside the gallery I had opened in honor of Miguel, our father. Alone. Vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. Her eyes met mine, dark pools of exhaustion, regret, and a fragile hope. Gone was the fiery rage that had burned in them when she first confronted me in my office. Now she looked like someone who had weathered a storm and was left stripped bare by the cold. "I'm sorry, Anna," she said softly, voice cracking under the weight of years lost and pain endured. "I was lost. I was drowning in lies and shadows. I thought if I kept pretending, if I kept playing the part she wrote for me, I could save us all. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Her words hung in the chilly air between us, fragile but honest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to break through the fortress of bitterness and silence that had built itself between us. But years of neglect, betrayal, and cold shoulders had formed walls that seemed impossible to breach. Clara took a slow, steadying breath, the kind that comes when someone has wrestled with demons and is finally ready to confront them head-on. "Let me help you tell the rest of the story," she said, voice steadier now. "About Miguel. About us. About everything you don't know. About everything she tried to hide." For a moment the past seemed to press close. The years of childhood marked by favoritism and silence. The quiet moments we never shared. The scars etched deep by our mother's cruelty and secrets. Then just as suddenly the air between us softened. It was the first olive branch we had ever exchanged. A fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the two sisters who had been strangers could begin to rebuild what had been broken. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of my life. Clara and I spent long hours poring over old photographs, letters, and memories. She revealed parts of our mother I had never known. Her fears, her regrets, her moments of weakness disguised as cruelty. We shared the pain of growing up in a house where love was a currency doled out unfairly, where survival often meant silence. Clara told me about the nights she cried alone in her room, the times she tried to reach out but was shut down, the way she felt trapped in a role that was never truly hers. And slowly, we began to stitch together the fragments of our past, the tangled threads of family and betrayal, into a story that neither of us could tell alone. Together, we decided to turn the gallery into a space not just for Miguel's art, but for healing. We hosted exhibitions dedicated to survivors of broken families, fundraisers for victims of abuse, and talks on the power of truth and forgiveness. The Miguel Herrera Foundation became more than a tribute. It became a movement. Clara took a step toward redemption not by denying her past, but by embracing it and using her voice to speak for those who had been silenced. I watched her grow stronger each day, her bitterness melting into determination. But our mother? She was slipping further away, consumed by shame and isolation. Her refusal to face the consequences of her actions had left a void that no apology could fill. One evening, Clara sat beside me in the quiet of the gallery office. The city lights twinkled through the window, and for the first time in years, we felt like sisters instead of enemies. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, voice soft. "Not from you. Not yet. But I want you to know I'm trying. Not just for me but for us. For Miguel." I nodded, feeling the weight of everything we had lost, and everything we might still gain. Because redemption isn't a destination. It's a journey. One we were only beginning. The cost of unveiling the truth was far heavier than I had anticipated. When I took my mother's secrets public, the reverberations ricocheted beyond my family's crumbling walls, reaching into every corner of my life, threatening everything I had built. At first, the press frenzy was overwhelming. Headlines screamed about betrayal, murder, and deceit. Friends and acquaintances I once trusted now averted their eyes or whispered behind closed doors. Old family friends who had once smiled warmly at me now turned cold, their loyalty to my mother unwavering despite the evidence. It was as if I had become the villain in a story where I was only trying to reclaim my own existence. My law firm suffered. Clients who feared scandal quietly withdrew, fearing the association. The circle of allies I had cultivated for years slowly dissolved. Business partners hesitated to answer calls. Every victory I had earned through years of hard work seemed to evaporate overnight. But worst of all was the constant undercurrent of fear. One night, after a late meeting, I found a folded envelope slipped under my apartment door. No stamp, no return address. Just a chilling message typed neatly on a small card. "Stop digging. Or else." My pulse quickened. For a moment, every shadow in the dim hallway seemed a threat. I felt the cold fingers of danger curl around my spine. But I did not stop. Because the truth was not just about inheritance or justice. It was about survival. It was about breaking a silence that had lasted far too long. About honoring Miguel's memory by refusing to let his story be buried again. I doubled down on my work, pushing through sleepless nights fueled by determination and caffeine. I hired trusted security, reinforced my digital defenses, and surrounded myself with a small, loyal team who believed in the cause as much as I did. At the same time, Claire and I grew closer. She became my anchor when the world tilted, a reminder that despite everything, family was more than blood. It was choice. Yet every step forward felt like a battle. My mother's loyalists fought back with whispers, threats, and legal roadblocks. Old allies in the political and business world tried to buy silence. But my resolve hardened. I remembered Miguel's words from the letter I never received. "For the child I'll never meet, but already love." I owed him the courage to face every shadow. The cost was steep. I lost comfort, peace, and some semblance of normalcy. But I gained freedom. The days blurred into weeks after the threats. My life felt like walking on a knife's edge. Every step cautious, every shadow suspicious. But I refused to back down. The truth had to come out no matter the cost. The media circus intensified as more details about the politician's role in Miguel's death surfaced. Witnesses came forward. Documents were uncovered. The investigation reopened with fresh vigor, shaking the foundations of a world built on lies. Our mother's public image shattered completely. Once admired and respected, she became a symbol of betrayal, complicit in a cover-up that cost an innocent man his life. I watched her spiral, the once proud woman reduced to a figure haunted by guilt and regret. Our confrontations grew more frequent and tense, each one peeling back layers of denial. But it wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about justice. For Miguel, for me, for the silent victims of secrets too long buried. Clara stood by my side, her own scars visible but her spirit unbroken. We became a team united not just by blood but by a shared purpose. Together we faced the storms, legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal demons. And slowly the tide began to turn. For the first time in years I felt hope. Because sometimes, reckoning is the painful but necessary path to redemption. The aftermath of the reckoning was a tempest that left no corner of my life untouched. The victories we had fought so hard for were bittersweet, soaked in sacrifice and unexpected costs. The politicians' disgrace sent shockwaves through the corridors of power, but the damage reverberated deeply within my own family. Our mother, once untouchable, was now isolated and broken. She retreated into silence, haunted by the ghosts of her choices and the weight of guilt that no public scandal could fully expose. Clara and I, despite our fragile new bond, felt the fractures beneath the surface. The years of pain, neglect, and misunderstanding couldn't be erased overnight. Late-night arguments, long silences, and tentative reconciliations became part of our new normal. I found myself questioning everything: the meaning of family, the true cost of truth, and what victory really meant. Was it justice, or was it simply another form of loss? The business I had built began to show cracks. Clients who had stayed loyal started drifting away, uncomfortable with the shadows that clung to my name. I fought to keep everything together, but it felt like walking on thin ice. And then there was the loneliness. The kind that creeps in when you realize that even the closest ties can be fragile, and the past cannot be undone. Yet amid the turmoil I discovered something unexpected: resilience. The kind of strength born not from perfection or peace, but from enduring pain and choosing to rise anyway. Clara and I promised each other to keep fighting, not just for the legacy of Miguel but for the chance to build something new from the ruins of our family. Because sometimes the price of family is high, but it's worth paying. As the dust began to settle, I realized that the story wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about legacy. The legacy Miguel had left behind and the one Clara and I could build together. The gallery became more than a tribute. It was a beacon of hope. People came from all over to see Miguel's paintings, to hear our story, to understand the power of truth and resilience. The foundation grew, supporting artists who had been silenced, families broken by secrets, and survivors seeking healing. Clara and I worked side by side, our past wounds still raw but healing with each shared moment. We spoke honestly about the years we lost, the pain inflicted, and the complicated love that tied us together. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. But forgiveness began to take root, not as forgetting but as freeing. Our mother remained distant, trapped by her guilt and regrets. I understood she was lost in a world she helped fracture. But I chose to focus on what we could create, not what we couldn't change. One afternoon, standing in the gallery surrounded by Miguel's vibrant, haunting art, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past was still there, shadows that would never fully disappear, but I was no longer a prisoner to them. I was free. Clara smiled beside me, and for the first time I believed in a future where family meant more than blood, where love and truth could coexist even amid scars. Life had shown who truly won in the end. And it wasn't hate or silence. It was hope. Even as Clara and I built our new lives, the past wasn't done with us. Shadows lurked in corners we thought were clear, memories resurfaced in the quiet moments, and old wounds ached beneath the surface. One evening I received an anonymous package at the gallery. Inside was a faded photograph, one I hadn't seen before. It showed Miguel and another man smiling warmly. The back had a scribbled note: "Not all truths have been told." My heart tightened. Who was the other man? What secrets remained buried? Determined to uncover the full story, Clara and I plunged back into the investigation. We revisited old contacts, examined new evidence, and pushed through walls of silence that threatened to close in around us. Each discovery brought clarity and danger. Threatening messages escalated. Strange phone calls. A car that followed me home late one night. But we refused to be intimidated, because some truths were worth risking everything for. The photograph that arrived in the anonymous package felt like a key to a locked door I had never dared to approach before. It showed Miguel standing beside another man, their faces illuminated by genuine smiles, an intimacy between them that went far beyond friendship. Yet the identity of this man was a mystery, a ghost from the past lingering in the shadows of my father's story. For days Clara and I pored over every clue we could find. We scrutinized the photograph itself, The style of clothes, the backdrop, even the faint inscription on the back, almost illegible from age and fading ink. The handwriting wasn't Miguel's, but neither was it unfamiliar. It hinted at someone close, someone trusted. We started with old acquaintances, friends from Miguel's early days, people who might have known his inner circle. Some doors slammed shut. Others opened slightly, their occupants wary, eyes flickering with fear or suspicion when Miguel's name came up. It was clear his legacy was tangled in dangerous webs, and many preferred it stayed buried. Weeks passed, the search feeling endless until a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Eduardo Vargas. A reclusive artist who had once shared a studio with Miguel, Eduardo was known for his fierce loyalty and an unyielding sense of justice. But he had vanished from public life for decades, a ghost like Miguel himself. When we finally found Eduardo's studio, it was like stepping into a time capsule. The air smelled thick with oil paint and turpentine, and walls were lined with canvases that had never seen the light of day. Dust danced in the fading afternoon light as Eduardo looked up from his workbench, eyes sharp despite the years etched on his face. "You're here for Miguel," he said without preamble, voice gravelly but steady. "I've been waiting." His words sent a chill down my spine. Waiting? For what? Eduardo's story spilled out in fragments. He told us how Miguel had confided in him about the corruption he'd uncovered. A sprawling network of crime tied to political elites, art theft rings and illegal money flows. Miguel had threatened to expose it all, to blow the lid off a sinister empire built on lies and silence. That ambition had marked him for death. Eduardo revealed how Miguel's so-called car crash was no accident but a calculated murder designed to silence him permanently. "And now," Eduardo said quietly, "they want to silence you too." He pulled out a battered leather-bound notebook, worn from years of handling. Inside were Miguel's coded letters, sketches and cryptic notes, clues to the truth he'd been chasing. As I flipped through the pages, the weight of responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. This was more than a family story. It was a call to action. Clara stood beside me, her hand gripping mine with fierce determination. "We have to finish what he started." The path ahead was fraught with danger. Powerful enemies lurked in the shadows, their reach long and merciless. But we had come too far to turn back now. We would unmask the lies, expose the corruption and honor Miguel's memory by bringing justice to light, no matter the cost. The knowledge we had uncovered was both a weapon and a target painted squarely on our backs. Every step deeper into Miguel's secrets brought new dangers. Unseen eyes watching, whispered threats veiled in polite smiles, and the feeling that the walls were closing in. One evening, as Claire and I sat in the gallery office poring over Miguel's notes, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated but answered. "Stop digging," the voice warned, cold and menacing. "This isn't a game. Walk away or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Fear crawled up my spine, but anger pushed it aside. This was war and we were soldiers. We tightened security around the gallery and our homes, encrypted every communication and forged alliances with trusted journalists and lawyers who believed in our cause. Clara threw herself into the fight, her sharp mind and fierce loyalty becoming our strongest shield. Yet beneath her tough exterior I glimpsed the toll it was taking. Sleepless nights, anxious glances, moments when she questioned if the battle was worth it. But we pressed on. We began connecting the dots. Names in Miguel's letters tied to shell companies, offshore accounts and political figures who thrived on corruption. Public pressure mounted as we released carefully verified information to the media. Protests erupted, investigations reopened, and the empire Miguel had sought to destroy began to tremble. Yet with every victory the risk escalated. One night Clara's car was tampered with, brakes cut. We narrowly escaped what could have been a fatal accident. I realized then that the line between justice and survival was razor thin. And crossing it meant risking everything, including our lives. The tension between justice and survival had never felt more fragile. Every victory brought with it a new wave of threats, and the invisible enemies lurking in the shadows made it clear they would stop at nothing to keep their empire intact. Claire and I found ourselves pushed to the brink. The gallery, once a sanctuary for Miguel's legacy, had become a battleground. The weight of the investigation pressed heavily on our shoulders, and the cost of truth was becoming painfully clear. One rainy night as I locked up the gallery alone, I noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. Heart pounding, I reached for my phone to call Clara, but before I could, the stranger stepped forward. A man with cold eyes and a voice like ice. "You should have stopped when you had the chance," he said, stepping closer. Fear and defiance surged inside me. "I'm not done. Not yet." He smiled thinly, a predator sensing his prey's resolve. "Then prepare for the consequences." That night marked a turning point. We realized the fight for justice wasn't just about exposing the past. It was about surviving the present. Our network of allies grew tighter. We coordinated with investigative journalists, legal experts, and activists, forming a united front against corruption. But the cost was personal. Clara confided her fears in me, admitting the toll the fight was taking on her spirit. I shared my own doubts, the sleepless nights, the haunting memories. Together we promised to keep pushing forward, to carry Miguel's torch no matter the darkness that tried to snuff it out. Because sometimes breaking point is where true strength is forged. The deeper Clara and I dug, the more tangled the web became. The corruption wasn't isolated. It spread like a cancer through every corner of the city's power structure. Politicians, businessmen, law enforcement, all intertwined in a dangerous game of silence and control. With each new revelation, the stakes rose higher. Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows, risking their safety to share what they knew. The press amplified our story, turning public opinion against those who once seemed untouchable. But with visibility came vulnerability. Threats escalated into acts of sabotage. Offices vandalized, files mysteriously disappearing, digital attacks targeting our communications. One night, a break-in at the gallery shook me to the core. Priceless artworks vandalized, letters from Miguel stolen, and a chilling message scrawled on the wall. "This is your last warning." I felt the walls closing in, but surrender was never an option. Together, Clara and I tightened security, mobilized our allies, and prepared for the fight that would decide everything. This was no longer just a quest for justice. It was a battle for survival, truth, and the future we believed in. The pressure was suffocating. Every day brought new challenges, new dangers, and a mounting sense of urgency. Clara and I were no longer just fighting to uncover the truth. We were fighting to protect it and ourselves. Our enemies were ruthless. The corruption we had exposed threatened to unravel powerful alliances, and those in the shadows would do anything to silence us. Anonymous threats escalated. Digital attacks attempted to erase our evidence. People close to us were followed, watched, and intimidated. But the public's hunger for justice was growing. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Social media buzzed with support. Journalists dug deeper, fueled by the documents and testimonies we provided. We found allies in unexpected places. Whistleblowers who risked everything, lawyers who believed in truth, and even some officials willing to stand up against the tide of corruption. Still, the cost was high. Clara's health began to falter under the stress. Sleepless nights and relentless pressure left her drained but resolute. I, too, wrestled with fear and doubt, wondering how much longer we could hold on. One evening, as we prepared for a crucial court hearing, Clara confided in me, her voice trembling. "Anna, what if this breaks us? What if we lose everything?" I took her hands in mine, steadying both of us. "We've come too far to stop now. Whatever happens, we face it together." The court hearing was a turning point. Evidence meticulously presented, testimonies powerful and damning. The walls of deceit began to crumble. Yet outside the courthouse, tension hung heavy, the calm before the storm. Because in battles like these, victory is never guaranteed. It's fought one day at a time with courage, grit, and an unyielding refusal to be silenced. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled with people hungry for justice, for truth, for closure. The media frenzy had reached a fever pitch, but Clara and I knew the real battle was inside those walls. The prosecutors laid out the case with precision, connecting Miguel's death to the sprawling network of corruption we had uncovered. Witnesses testified, some with trembling voices, others with steely resolve, unraveling the lies that had held power for so long. Our mother sat at the back, a shadow of the woman she once was. Her eyes avoided mine, but I saw the flicker of regret. It wasn't forgiveness I sought. It was understanding, closure for wounds too deep to heal overnight. As the final evidence was presented, Miguel's letters, Eduardo's testimony, the irrefutable proof, the room held its breath. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. "Guilty." The sentence was severe. The corrupt were brought to justice. The empire built on deception crumbled. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. Clara and I exchanged a glance, weary but victorious. Yet the real victory was quieter, more profound. It was in the healing between us. The rebuilding of a fractured family. The legacy Miguel deserved. Walking away from the courthouse hand in hand with Clara, I felt a weight lift. Life had shown who truly won in the end. Not bitterness. Not silence. But the courage to face the past and build a better future. The courtroom silence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't empty or peaceful. It was thick, electric, waiting to rupture. The trial had reached its final phase, and Clara and I were no longer just witnesses or victims. We had become symbols of something larger. Miguel's voice echoed through every exhibit, every page read aloud. The lies that had buried him for years were now scattered, exposed under fluorescent lights and the gaze of a restless nation. The defense tried to twist everything, to paint our investigation as a vendetta, a family grudge turned into public theater. But the evidence was a mountain, and each testimony a hammer. Eduardo Vargas, the reluctant ally turned hero, had delivered the final blow. His first-hand account of the meeting that sealed Miguel's fate was devastating. The jury saw it. So did our mother. She sat there, shoulders sunken, no longer the cold, distant matriarch but a woman aging rapidly under the weight of truth. I watched her sometimes when I thought no one would notice. There was something like sorrow in her eyes. Or maybe just exhaustion. Perhaps both. Clara and I shared little more than glances during the proceedings. We had grown into something beyond sisters. Co-conspirators in a cause we never chose but couldn't walk away from. There was no room for tears or reconciliation. Not yet. What bound us now wasn't childhood or blood. It was justice. And justice was coming. When the final arguments were made and the jury filed out, the silence returned. I didn't breathe for hours. Clara kept her eyes forward, still and unreadable. The verdict didn't come that day. It came 3 days later. 3 endless days of not sleeping, of reading over everything again and again, as if trying to predict the unpredictable. I wandered the streets at night sometimes, trying to feel something other than dread. The city was still, and in that stillness, I imagined Miguel walking beside me. Not as a ghost, but as a memory that refused to be erased. When the phone call finally came, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by boxes of court transcripts and notes. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. They've reached a verdict. And just like that, the silence broke. I spent that night reviewing every document, every testimony, as if I could somehow prepare for what came next. I didn't sleep. I didn't want to. In the morning, I dressed in black. Not for mourning, but for battle. Claire met me at the courthouse steps. She wore no makeup. No jewelry. Just resolve. Inside, the crowd had doubled. Reporters filled the gallery. Faces from every corner of the city had shown up. They weren't just watching a verdict. They were witnessing the culmination of decades of silence finally breaking. Some of the jurors looked pale. Others resolute. I wondered what it was like for them to hold someone's life in their hands. To decide not just the fate of a man but the legacy of a family. As the bailiff called for order and the judge entered, a single breath passed through the room. It was as though the whole world inhaled at once, waiting for the blow, or the relief. I will never forget the sound of the word, guilty. The judge read the counts. One by one. Guilty. 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 Each word was a thread snapping in a great tangled web. The man who orchestrated Miguel's death, the one who had leveraged fear and silence for decades, was finally stripped of his power. I stared at him as the sentence was read. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had grown. The courtroom erupted into noise, but I heard none of it. My ears rang. My legs trembled beneath me. Clara grabbed my hand, her grip fierce, as if grounding both of us in that impossible moment. Our mother cried. Not loud. Not performative. Just a slow, steady release. I didn't go to her. Not then. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Microphones surrounded us. But we didn't stop. We didn't speak. We walked down the steps of the courthouse into the winter sunlight like 2 survivors emerging from a collapsed mine. The weight wasn't gone. But it had shifted. In the days that followed, we received letters from strangers. Survivors of corruption. Daughters like me. People who had lost fathers, brothers, sisters. They thanked us. They called us brave. But I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. Clara and I met on the rooftop of the gallery one night. We looked out at the city Miguel once painted, our breath clouding in the cold. We didn't speak for a long time. Then Clara said, "He can rest now." I nodded. And for the first time I believed her. The man found guilty was escorted out in cuffs. I watched his hands, the same hands that once signed death warrants in secret, now shaking. He wouldn't serve the full sentence. Men like him rarely did. But the stain of truth was irreversible. We stood outside the courthouse for hours. Not talking. Just feeling the way the wind had changed. I felt my lungs expand without guilt. Without weight. That night I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. The world tried to silence him. Tried to erase me. But we are still here. We didn't celebrate. That night Clara and I sat in her apartment and shared a bottle of wine in silence. Not to toast but to remember. To mark the end of something heavy. And the start of something new. We held the memorial 2 weeks later. Not in a church but in the gallery. Among his paintings. Among truth. People came. Strangers, neighbors, the broken and the brave. They spoke of Miguel like a legend. A whisper that had finally found its voice. For the first time our family wasn't hiding in shame. We were standing in legacy. Clara read a letter Miguel had written before his death. A letter I hadn't seen until that morning. In it he spoke of love. Not fear. Not regret. Love. For art. For truth. For us. I felt my mother watching us from the back. She didn't speak. He didn't need to. When it was over, Claire and I walked outside. We carried a small urn with Miguel's ashes to the old vineyard he once dreamed of buying. We spread him there in the soil, in the roots where life begins again. There was no music. Just wind. And for the first time, peace. We stayed until the sun dipped behind the hills, talking about who Miguel had been before the fear. About the stories he used to tell us at night. About the way he'd hum when he painted. Later that evening, people lit candles in the street. They held up his paintings like torches. Some wept. Others smiled. It was the most honest goodbye I could imagine. I wrote a dedication on the gallery wall the next day, for those who spoke the truth even when it burned. In the following weeks we held workshops, invited local artists, turned the gallery into a living thing. Miguel's name was no longer whispered. It was celebrated. And that, I think, is what he would have wanted most. Returning to my mother's home felt like walking into a photograph. Familiar, frozen, and silent. She opened the door without a word. Time had changed her. She was thinner. Softer somehow. The sharpness in her voice was gone. The house smelled of dust and fading memories. Sunlight streamed through the same old lace curtains, illuminating furniture that hadn't moved in decades. Every corner echoed with things left unsaid. We sat across from each other in the living room. No more pretenses. No more masks. "You hate me," she said. Her voice wasn't defiant. It was tired. Her eyes didn't meet mine at first, as though afraid of what she'd see. "I don't know what I feel," I answered. And that was true. There was no neat box to place the ache inside my chest. She nodded. Looked at her hands. I was scared. More than anything. And I let that fear decide everything. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. One of many I hoped would follow. I didn't forgive her that day. I couldn't. But I didn't leave either. We sat in the quiet of that hollow house until the sun set, and for the first time in years, we simply existed. She brought out a photo album. One I hadn't seen in decades. We flipped through pages of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, moments that felt like another lifetime. Pictures of Miguel with paint on his fingers. Of Clara holding her violin. Of me always in the background. "I was too afraid to see what you really needed," she whispered. "I thought control was protection. But it was just fear in a different suit." At one point she said, "I loved you both. But I loved from a place of fear, and it made me blind." I believed her. That was the hardest part. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was believing she truly hadn't known what she was doing. That somehow ignorance could be just as damaging as malice. We spoke about Miguel. And for the first time she didn't deflect. She told me stories I'd never heard. Of how he used to sing to her, how he begged her not to give up on art. He wept then. Not for the past, but for the future that would never be. As I left, I kissed her forehead. Not out of forgiveness, Out of hope. Hope that someday, we might meet each other not as mother and daughter, but as two women brave enough to confront their own shadows. Life didn't go back to normal. There was no normal to return to. But Claire and I began to rebuild. Not just the gallery but ourselves. Our identities had been shaped by trauma, grief, silence. Now we had to rediscover who we were without the weight of vengeance. We expanded the gallery, turning it into a foundation for young artists and truth-tellers. Miguel's name wasn't just on the door. It was in the mission. In the voice we gave others. We started scholarships, community programs. We traveled to small towns where young people felt invisible and told them, "We see you." We told our story. We listened to others. And each time we found healing in shared scars. We still fought sometimes. Old wounds don't heal overnight. But they scar over. And scars, I've learned, mean survival. And they mean stories. Stories etched into the skin, not to hide but to reveal. My mother visited the gallery once. Quietly. Alone. She didn't speak to anyone. She just stood in front of one painting for a long time. It was the portrait of Miguel mid-brushstroke, a look of hope frozen on his face. Then she left. I let her go. We named one wing of the foundation after Clara. She protested at first, but I insisted. She had carried more of this burden than anyone ever realized. Together we wrote a book. A memoir, a testimony, a warning. It became more than we imagined. It became a spark. A national conversation bloomed from it. Politicians referenced us. Journalists quoted us. Survivors reached out. We had cracked something open. And in that spark we found purpose. For the first time I felt like I belonged in the world. Not just as Anna, the girl who was overlooked, but Anna, the voice that wouldn't stay silent. Years later I stood alone in the gallery long after closing. Lights off. Only moonlight pouring through the skylight. I walked past the canvases slowly, each one a chapter of a story no longer hidden. In the center was the portrait Miguel had painted of us. Me and Claire as children. He had painted us side by side, hands almost touching. That detail always caught me. Almost touching. A lifetime of near connection. I stood there for a long time. I remembered everything. Vain. The silence. The fight. The fire. I remembered the cold nights when I thought I'd never find my place. The mornings I woke with guilt as my only companion. The way Clara once refused to meet my eyes. The way she held my hand at the verdict. And I remembered who I became. Not the daughter forgotten. Not the shadow. But the one who remained. And in the end the one who rose. I took the painting off the wall and carried it to the back room. It would be restored, reframed, but never replaced. Because the story wasn't over. There would always be more to tell. More voices to lift. More truths to fight for. I was no longer Anna, the daughter who was overlooked. I was Anna, the witness, the survivor, the storyteller. And I was just getting started. I sat at Miguel's old desk, now my writing space, and opened a new journal. I wrote only one line. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you bring to life over and over again. Then I picked up my brush. And I began to paint. The story continues. Even after the verdict, after the memorial, after all the ash had settled, there were still corners of my heart I hadn't dared explore. I thought the trial had unearthed every truth, dragged every ghost into the light. But the deepest secrets never live in files or courtrooms. They live in memory. It began with a box. Clara found it in an old attic drawer, weathered leather, stitched with initials I didn't recognize. Inside were journals. Some belonged to Miguel. Others were our father's. I hesitated to touch them. I thought I'd buried him already, in my mind, in my grief. But memory isn't that kind. It waits. It watches. And then one day it returns. The entries were dated years before his death. There were sketches, poems, unsent letters. Some were to me, some to my mother. But the most painful were to Miguel. I failed you, he wrote. And I don't know how to undo that. Page after page I saw a man unraveling. A man who had chosen silence over courage. A man tormented by the weight of what he knew and the price of protecting what he loved, even if it meant loving wrong. I read them all in one sitting. When I finished, the sun had risen. Clara sat beside me the entire time, silent. What if we misunderstood him? She finally asked. Then we misunderstood because he let us, I answered. But the edge in my voice was gone. What remained was something quieter. Something closer to sorrow. We decided not to publish the journals. Not yet. Some truths weren't for the world. They were for us. But I wrote about them. Not directly. In fiction. In paintings. In whispers woven through characters no one would recognize but me. And in doing so I began to forgive him. I began to forgive myself. Years passed. The gallery grew. Our names became staples in art circles and social justice movements. We received awards we never expected. Invitations to speak. To teach. To lead. But none of that mattered as much as one afternoon in early autumn, when a young girl came into the gallery with her mother. She stared at one of Miguel's self-portraits for over an hour. When I approached her, she asked, "Did he really exist?" "Yes," I said. "He still does." She nodded slowly. "He looks like someone who could see everything. Even pain." I smiled. "Especially pain." They left. But that moment lingered. Because that girl didn't see a victim. He saw a mirror. And that's what Miguel had become. Not just a memory but a reflection. Clara eventually married. I didn't. But I built a life full of people who saw me. Who didn't compare me. Who didn't need me to be anything other than Anna. Our mother passed quietly one winter. Clara held her hand. I arrived too late. But I said goodbye in my own way. I sat in the church after everyone left, holding a locket she once wore. Inside was a photo of all three of us, Clara, Miguel and me. That surprised me. So did the inscription I found carved faintly into the back. "Forgive me, Anna. I was afraid of your fire." I cried. Not for her. But for the little girl who once needed that love and never got it. I told her, sitting alone in that church pew, that she was seen. That she was enough. And I meant it. I never wrote a book about it. Not the whole story anyway. People asked. Publishers called. But I couldn't do it. Because the story didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to Miguel. To Clara. Even to our mother. But I wrote pieces. Short stories. Paintings. Stage plays. I let pieces of the truth live through fiction. That felt right. I traveled. To places Miguel once dreamed of painting. To cities he sketched but never visited. I carried a journal of his with me. I wrote my thoughts beside his, as if continuing a conversation that death never truly ended. One night in Florence, I stood at a bridge and watched the sunset turn the Arno River into fire. I pulled out the journal and wrote, "I am not what was lost. I am what survived. And I believed it. Now I teach. I mentor girls who feel invisible. I tell them, you are not a shadow. You are the light they didn't expect." Sometimes when the gallery is quiet, I sit by Miguel's last painting, the one he never finished. And I imagine the colors he would have used, the lines he might have changed. Then I pick up a brush. And I finish it. Because legacy isn't what's left behind. It's what you choose to carry forward. And I choose him. I choose the truth. I choose me. Anna.